All right. We are back to not, we're back just talking over video, and we have Brad with us this time. All three of us with HTD Health. Very excited to be chatting today because it's been a busy week. It's been a busy week in DC. Just this morning, I was preparing for a little talk on how disparate HIEs and information exchange looks nowadays, and I accidentally stumbled upon a beta website, a new website facade for the ASTP, which is with how much I've been anticipating HTI 5. It's just nice that we keep getting little Christmas gifts before Christmas is actually here. So there's a lot to cover. We've got 2 blogs from Steve Posnack in the last few weeks, and one of them is a little more directed about how TEFCA and CMS Aligned Networks are engaging with each other. So I'm curious, I want to hear from Brendan, if I may. What was your take? I know you wrote a little bit about that. Let's dive right into it.
You may have found the beta website, but there was a whole lot of alpha in Steve's posts, if I have to go there. Steve has 3 posts, actually. So he had 2 weeks ago, he kicked it off. He's like, I'm going to start writing again. And then he had the TEFCA post that tied in the speedboats earlier this week. And then even today, another mini post saying, hey, check out this cool stuff we're doing. So like you said, we all thought from Dr. Keen's comments in DC last week, we're like, all right, HTI 5 is coming, ASTP is doing something. They are doing something. There's a whole lot of something. Maybe we still get a HTI 5, but we get these posts. And so earlier this week, we had the tied in the speedboats, and this was a statement about TEFCA, the future of TEFCA, the intersection and overlap of CMS Aligned Networks, another government network initiative as part of the CMS Health Tech ecosystem, and then TEFCA, from the Cures Act, which has been progressing steadily since 2020. And Steve's statement was pretty clear, whereas like his first post, December 2nd or 3rd, was sort of like alluding to what he put into the second post. This was clear. He said, look, these are complementary. TEFCA is the floor. CMS Aligned Networks is the ceiling, exploring the far edges, the outer reach, the really cool advanced stuff. The piece that I thought was interesting is he said, hey, scheduling data, not something TEFCA really does right now. Encounters, not really something TEFCA does right now. And that's just like kind of true, kind of not. Encounters are in USCBI. You can pull them. And then you could say, okay, it's about push notifications and things like that, which true, TEFCA doesn't facilitate today. But, like that was one piece where it's like, oh, it kind of does it. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts that, were sparked by either on that topic or on other pieces.
Brad, you go first.
Well, I'm interested. I haven't read Steve's post today, so sounds like I got some reading to do right after this. So CMS Aligned Networks is taking on the Herculean task of getting co-opetition without actually the regulatory framework that TEFCA has. CMS Aligned Networks starts to pull in more types of care delivery information that isn't traditional EHI. That feels like that complicates the end goals, but Pryce, I don't know if you read and you want to say anything there.
The one thing I was going to say is, Brendan, when you called out that TEFCA does already support exchange of encounter information, the way that I read Steve's post was actually, we don't have a concept for this proactive fire notification, fire subscription, event-triggered push of encounter or appointment information. That's the way I read it, because that's, item 15 or something in the CMS Aligned Network framework. But then upon reading your thoughts, I was like, is he talking about sort of clinical information from encounters, or is he talking about appointment information that you'd be receiving before an encounter takes place? And then, Brendan, you're mentioning that TEFCA is trying to create a floor and the CMS Aligned Networks are trying to create a ceiling, but I keep wondering, like, doesn't TEFCA have a ceiling too, like already with the SOPs? Like, what happens when 2 CMS aligned networks or 2 CMS engaged parties in this ecosystem try to use TEFCA Rails for something that TEFCA has not yet permitted the use of or proposed the use of? And will those things start to come to a confluence in this way? Like they're not really complementary, or will they just fold right into how people start using TEFCA, and TEFCA will only set the floor for data exchange? So these are things that I haven't really mulled through yet, but I have a feeling you have.
I've got the tea, I've got the holiday wine, whatever kind of mulled drink you're looking for. So one, to the first point about encounter data, yeah, like if you read as notifications, TEFCA doesn't do that, right? There's been attempts to do notifications, Care Quality, Commonwealth, TEFCA are all pull-based network, query-based networks. And in the Care Quality world, there was a implementation guide for notifications. They put it out there. They said, here's how we'll do it. And nobody used it. And so TEFCA doesn't have that, doesn't have an SOP, doesn't have the definitions in place. So that's not in there. Fair. But the way you wrote it, it's like, okay, maybe he means this other criteria. And in that light, it just gets to this topic that's very interesting of like, as we think about the US CDI, the core clinical data, we have historic data, the things that have happened, the procedures, the medications, the notes, the labs. That's kind of the easy mode. What's actually the hard mode is when we're thinking ahead about the care plan and what needs to be done. Because unfulfilled needs are market signal. And as you put market signal onto a network, one, they'll use it for care. And understanding the care plan and adjusting it and collaborating on it, that's the cool part of putting it out there. The not nefarious, but like the part that's going to bring more tension is that is market opportunity. That is unrealized revenue that if I can see it, I can say, let me steer towards me. And we've seen that tension boil over before in other networks, right? SureScripts, by having fill data and understanding that there's refills outstanding from pharmacies. Well, if you're a pharmacy and you can know that, you can say, hey, Brendan, come fill it over here for cheaper or faster or whatever. And so for years, SureScripts prevented pharmacies from accessing med history, and they caught PillPack through an intermediary, RemiMed or something like that, pulling that data to try and say, hey, come and use PillPack, and they cut off RemiMed and they don't exist anymore. And so, or Remi Health or something like that. And so all of that shows that when you have forward future activities via orders, via appointments, via prescriptions, then you can start to say, let me steer towards the things I want, which may be good for the patient. You may be saying this is part of a better care plan. You won't fall through the cracks, or could be more nefarious and just sort of like, oh, I can make more revenue by poaching all the orders from my providers on the street. And so I think that's going to come to a head as we get to this world via TEFCA, via CMS Aligned Networks, via US CDI iteration, where we put certainly orders now as part of the US CDI data set will be out there, and maybe appointments in the future.
Man, provider steering. There's a whole.
It's good and bad. It's good and bad.
It's
but
good
like
and
that's
bad.
Back in the day in care quality care world, this was the main fear, right? Like before providers were hooked up for treatment purpose of use, the big discussion was like, oh, Dr. Smith down the street's just going to steal my patients. And that proved not to be true because you can infer lightly via the clinical historic data what needs to occur. But by and large, it was just like, all right, Pryce just got hit by a bus. He's in the ER. We need to get his records. Was the use case. Right. And they're like, wow, how transformative is it there?
Yeah, something I've been thinking about in particular as a former Cadence implementer with Epic, appointments, they have a special place in my heart. As far as CMS work groups go with the notifications of appointments, and then the Kill the Clipboard initiative, where you might like show up and show a physician your phone with all, or a registrar your phone that has a QR code and it's supposed to contain all of your clinical data and your administrative data. I keep thinking about how like appointments, like SIU notifications, don't have insurance information on them, because you really shouldn't be asking a patient about their insurance until they're standing right in front of you. And it's like, day of, are you eligible on this insurance? How do we make sure the billing process is smooth? Things like that. And so I'm starting to think appointment data it's not always accurate because it hasn't happened yet. Like it's accurate in the system of record, but what happens when the patient doesn't show up? Like how much noise is there going to be out there? Additional noise that ends up becoming a no-show, or a patient who brings their own PHR and says, here's everything you need to know about me to onboard me into your clinical system. Like, is he or she actually going to be keeping that PHR up to date? Like, we're telling them, oh, you'll be able to exchange your clinical data, your administrative data super simply through all of these networks. And I keep thinking a lot of this bureaucracy and challenge and data exchange actually exists because people and providers and insurers don't always have the right data ahead of time. They don't always exchange the right data ahead of time. So there's going to be like just numerous wrinkles that we start to discover. And then what? Think about how to solve for, or do we just abandon certain parts of the framework? That's what I've been thinking about this week.
I think we should definitely talk about the clear tension between TEFCA, which is Rails for all the care providers. Potentially there'll be some P&O activity, Brendan. You can let us know if you think so. And CMS Aligned Networks, which is, there's a lot of people who are participating in that are, we don't need to go into the definition of a network, but like we have PHRs or digital applications. We have providers that can participate in that. And we could talk for an hour about the tension between these two initiatives, speedboats versus raising all tides. I think what I'm most in doubt of is that we can drive co-opetition around a singular vision of what the check-in process is. I have no evidence like previous examples of this, but I think something that a CMS Aligned Network should be doing is requiring that the care delivery platforms expose what their process is, and less agree on what the check-in process has to be for everybody. But to say like it shouldn't take a deep discovery process for somebody to understand what does check-in at cardiology look like at NYU versus at Mount Sinai, or what does check-in look like at cardiology or oncology at Mount Sinai, instead of trying to get a bunch of people who are inherently competing with each other and trying to partner with each other to define shared standards. And I feel like TEFCA is doing that. And what we really need is better discoverability of how does this process actually happen?
Totally. I took us straight down the rabbit. Like we were sort of talking about CMS Aligned Networks and TEFCA in general. How do they complement each other? I took us down one rabbit hole because in a couple of work groups that I've been working in, you go down any given rabbit hole, whether it be the Kill the Clipboard initiative or the appointment and encounter notifications or the payers should have access to this data to close gaps in care. You start to realize they're all so niche and hard to solve for because there's really a lack of trust in between all the parties who are doing these things together. And you realize and that's why TEFCA hasn't accomplished these things yet. It's not because it's hard to encrypt data or it's hard to exchange data. It's because it's hard to convince parties to trust each other with a well thought out, comprehensive operating procedure or set of policies. And so anyway, just to bring us back to the sort of holistic picture instead of just getting checked in.
It's alignment on goals, right? Like if you view it as like CMS Line Networks is this vehicle to roll things out nationwide, like it doesn't have the right levers there. It is a convening function to say, hey, we're going to put CMS's weight and authority behind this initiative to convene on like the really forward facing things and move the ball forward very quickly on them. And yeah, there are all these like niche, kind of unrelated and different topics, but to pilot those, to go and try out and rapidly iterate through these QR code check-in iterations and ideations, well, that sets something that could be then used in TEFCA and rolled out more broadly, still voluntarily, right? Like it's not like TEFCA is mandatory, but a much broader suite of EHRs and participants in that ecosystem. And so that's the speedboats. The speedboats are zooming ahead. Some of them are going to crash on the island. Some of them are going to go and find treasure. Wherever you want to take Stephen's metaphor, the tide will follow that slowly but surely, raising all boats. That's what we heard from Steve in that post. One thing I just want to what Brad brought up. Will we see payment in operations? Well, we got kind of an answer in another update from ASTP and the RCE this week, in that the date from February of the requirement of operations for quality, for care management, for HEDIS, well, there's this February date where it had to be mandatory response. And since there's very little point-to-point optional operations volume today, everyone's like, well, what's going to happen there? And there's a lot of doubt. It'd be a very big blemish on the authority of the RC of TEFCA to move things forward if they went to a mandatory date and then nobody's doing it. It's a good way to say, actually, our dates are pretty optional. And so I think they looked ahead and they said, hey, this is upcoming. We're not going to get there. We need to iterate and change this based on the feedback we're seeing. So they removed that in some of the proposed SOP updates we saw this week. And they said, we're going to, facilitate better exchange in the short term by point to point, by people on the network doing operations for a couple different sub use cases, which some people are like, that's a big L for them. I'm like, no, the bigger L would have been the charge towards this date that just wasn't going to happen, that people would have said, hey, we're not responding because we haven't figured out fees. And then it's just another path to non-response that erodes the trust in their ability to iterate and roll out policy and technical changes across the network.
All right. So hadn't heard that. So much has happened this week. Let's do a rundown. I feel like I need to put together my reading for the holiday break. Brendan, start us on Monday. Where did we start this week?
It was really Tuesday with the TEFCA monthly call, where we heard the TEFCA update, a number of these new standard operating procedure iterations for treatment, IAS, and operations. So some minor clerical changes, some other fun things buried in there, but the operations one was the big one. And in there, they said, actually, as a payer and plan, you don't need to do reciprocity to start, right? You can just pull unidirectionally with your partners, which they're trying to encourage any change to get anyone doing operations over the network rails, which is great. Let's get one group, one provider, one payer doing it to remove putting your claims back on the network, I think is a good interim step. Ideally, you'd see reciprocity, but you put too big of a barrier, no one's going to do it. You need just one to prove things out and pilot things. In that call, we saw Steve also announce his post. So that was really exciting. And then today we saw the ASTP put out a number of interesting information blocking notices. Pryce, you're the one who found the information blocking stuff today here at HGD. What did you see in there?
Oh man, I want to go back to one of the first things you said, but we'll start with the information blocking. An FAQ was added that basically says, okay, if you're a business associate of a provider or your provider, you have some meaningful reason to access electronic health information, and you start working with, let's say, an electronic health record vendor and say, well, I just need to access the patient's preferred pharmacy or something like that. The HR can say, well, we don't have an API for that. So sorry, manner exception. We haven't developed it. It's not regulated. It's not part of US CDI. Now it's more clear in the FAQ, and this is sort of obviously a result of litigation that we've seen, like the PCC case, where they're saying, okay, if that's true, then a viable method to receive this information would be to use robotic process automation, screen scraping, whatever you want to call it. Like, it's okay to not support every possible data exchange under the earth, right? Those permutations are infinite, but you can't complain if somebody actually does want that data and they get it through a manner that you don't like. That's what the FAQ said in short, but it was sort of hidden at the bottom of Steve's blog post today, right? It's too much going on this week.
Well, we also got stuff outside of interoperability, like Datavant might be like rolled up into some mega corporation. It's just an onslaught. Everyone's like, let's get our updates out before Christmas. And so, I think we're all lost. But just before we go on to that, for the information blocking things, you're right. Everything in there, we kind of already know, especially if you work with a leading consultancy that helps mix tech and policy to help point solutions connect to EHRs and EHRs lean into information blocking regulation. I don't know what consultancy that would be, but perhaps there's
Reach
one
out
out
to
there.
us at hdhealth.com.
But if you don't work with a consultancy like this, then the guidance, the FAQs from the ASTP were useful in to say RPA, consider DHI unless there's the manner exception. Oh, here's how the manner exception actually works. That's what they put out into the world, and it's good to have that as an artifact so that it's just not red string in the basement explaining how the court cases all link together. So the ASTP taking away some of my ability to do good novel writing by doing a simple FAQ like that. The one crazy thing about this is it's going to be challenged because we saw them be challenged on this in HTI2 is that they don't have a statutory authority to say what is information blocking. They have a statutory authority to say what is not information blocking. That nuance, which I don't know how what we ended up with, was something that people were like, all this stuff you're proposing to put in HTI2 about what's information blocking, you can't do that, right? And so I wonder if we shall see that here. Like they're not, with these FAQs, I think it's probably like guidance, they're just giving nudges, but push come to shove, people could challenge in that way. So it'll be interesting to watch.
I was gonna say we got close to an actual court case where someone says like, well, what source are you using? Where did you get that information? Like they would have said Brendan Keeler, the health API guy, said it was okay for me to do this, but now they're all going to point at the ASTP and
Steve Posnack.
actual
Steve Posnack
authority.
said
Yeah. I wanted to. One of the first things you said that happened this week was, I guess on Tuesday, the TEFCA meeting where they pushed back the mandatory response to operations queries. I guess that, I had forgotten that you can join the network right now and use operations. Like it is not mandatory for entities to respond to those queries, but you can join the network and make those queries. And I forgot that a state blues plan has told me they specifically will never join TEFCA. They realized that, they potentially wouldn't need as much chart chasing or as many chart chasing tools, or they wouldn't need to buy Epic Pair platform or what have you if the operations use case within TEFCA was mandated, but they were still like, we wouldn't be interested in joining because we're not interested in responding. We're not interested in having like a reciprocal responsibility there. And now you're saying they can join and just harvest that data if the like
It's all point to point now, right? Like it would be, I'm a blue, I'm gonna join with my partner. My partner agrees and turns it on. Harvest is a really has some
yes.
connotations, but it'd be testing out that pattern over TEFCA Rails. And in the SOP, it says the RCE and governance is going to monitor this and see when it's right to do reciprocity. But the idea is we've had this for over a year now, the operations SOP. Nobody's using it. Let's encourage some use, because getting any use and then iterating is better than just waiting another year and a half. That's good product management, and a network product is a product. So props to them for finding that path. And hopefully we do see the blue you mentioned pursue this. I talked to a blue this week who said as much, that they want to do it. They have a provider on board. They want to use TEFCA. They pointed and said, Epic Nexus is going to block us. I'm like, well, that's information blocking. I don't think that's true. Let's talk about how we can push there if you really are seeing those signals. It would seem imprudent at this point in time where there is a bit of scrutiny on information blocking actors and other court cases that are progressing.
So there's a couple other things that happened this week. You touched on HDI5. Where is it? What do we expect? Are you going to be writing on Christmas Eve? What's the gut say?
What is going on here? I'm excited. I want to parse all the supposedly 34 certification criteria ripped out. So I've hazarded a guess of what those are. And maybe we expect with HTI6 we'll see new criteria, API forward criteria inserted. Someone in Health Tech Nerds noted that there's this type of meeting you can call with the OMB to push and sort of lobby and you can see those and see who's listed for those. There's one of those in early December that maybe delayed things. What doesn't make sense timing wise is like, that's early December. Dr. Keen was saying things about it last week, saying it's going to be this week. And now we're a week past that. And so I wonder, something else got gummed up, or maybe it's dropping as we speak. Maybe it's like a 6 p.m. drop today and we'll have a fun weekend. Like we can largely expect decertification of all these criteria that say you must type down demographics and you must do quality measures with older formats. They're going to gut a lot of the intrinsic capabilities of the HR, and even some of the outward facing things like direct trust or quality measures could be on the chopping block and then replaced with API native, Fire native capabilities. The cutting of the stuff within the HR, good riddance. Let everyone's in agreement at this point. What will be contentious is the proposed cutting of things like direct trust support or quality measures support that are not APIs, but they're pretty well established data transfer mechanisms. There's vendors that have invested a lot to support those. There are networks that support those things. That's when you're throwing somebody's baby out with the bathwater. That will cause some tension. So we should have a fun comment period. I'm more excited personally for HTI 6, which should have the API revamp, the APIification of the HR certification program, the Health IT certification program. What does that mean and look like? And then what are the remaining criteria? Do we get Fire subscriptions? A lot of fun that could come out of that.
Just one quick follow-up question on that. We see CMS programs really leaning into nationwide networks for tools like Direct Trust for access eligibility, access the reimbursement program. I know government agencies aren't always totally aligned on everything, but do you expect HDI5 to be in line with what we're seeing in the new CMS programs that are being announced?
Yeah, I mean, they lightly say you got to do health information exchange, and they maybe use direct trust, or maybe use TEFCA, or they leave the door open to get it back to the PCP or the PCP or whoever, one way or the other. I would say there's strong alignment across CMS and ASTP, right? CMS is stepping into health technology in a leading way that we haven't seen as much in prior administrations. We saw Alex Muggy from CMS dragging CMS into health technology last admin and in the Trump 1 admin, but with very little regulatory weight, with very little overall buy-in. And now, like under Oz, under Maha, this is a major part of it. CMS Health Tech ecosystem has Trump showing up at it. That's just a change of tone and a change of tenor that there's more gravitas and weight and effort across all of CMS and helping direct the ASTP. On the ASTP front, like they've said, they're working with other agencies. They're working with the DOJ. They're working with FTC because their number one priority is information blocking. And so we see those FAQs. You better believe there's going to be some fun stuff next year in terms of investigations and enforcement.
I want to make this practical for someone like myself who didn't even know that you could know something about HTI 6. Now I'm starting to wonder if HTI 10 is going to be like HTI X, like Apple does with their phones or something. HTI Pro one day. Looking at HTI 5, thinking about deregulation, thinking about the enablement of these networks, what do you see they're trying to practically accomplish in the market? Is it with info blocking, with HTI 5, is it just like, well, if we force all of these health tech developers to be available enough to exchange information through certain mechanisms, and they're not allowed to block the information, then we get organic competition that's better for everyone? Is that the underlying thesis, or what else is there to it?
There's a couple principles you see underpinning almost all health tech regulation. One is data portability, right? Consumer access, patient access is a consistent theme since HIPAA, and that we're just continuing to progress down. But you can think of that as data portability. Health tech is very leading in regulation that advances that. There's no other industry that's as far along.
But for what
Right?
for what purpose? And one of the things you mentioned was patient empowerment.
Right, that's portability. So then the two is co-opetition, right? Is a thriving ecosystem of tools for providers to choose from is a government priority with the influence that the innovation sector has on this administration. The A16Z and Palantir types that have a strong influence on this administration compared to prior ones. That is a big pressure that underpins sort of the information blocking push, that underpins the APIization of the program, is to allow for provider choice. So I can choose the EHR bundle, or I can choose a competitor who has equal access to the capabilities that the EHR does to compete fairly in the market. The EHR bundle will always have a ton of weight. The bundle is as a software package very compelling, but if you don't have a path to compete equally in terms of integrative capabilities, then you must always choose the vertically integrated option. That's just not what this administration wants to cultivate in the ecosystem. So that's two. And the last, but like underappreciated, is reduction of switching costs, right? The EHI export capability and the bulk export capability are both kind of geared towards how do we reduce switching costs between systems of record so that there can be more mobility and portability at a population level, so that I can switch from Epic to Cerner, or I can switch from Athena to ECW. Because right now, any system of record, the bigger the institution, the switching costs don't go up linearly, they go up exponentially. You can only reduce that by capabilities that allow you to mass export, and then it's just on a capability set and price point to switch over to something new. Cultivating that is another angle. And each of those requires different policy levers, different changes that sometimes have tensions between one another.
I'm taking this from you, Brendan, but I've been hearing you sort of preach about, as data is more mobile, as it's more liquid between systems, access to that data becomes a little bit more like a commodity. And then the question is, how are you as a software system or a system of record or a network or whatever adding value on top of that? We don't want the fact that one EHR software or one provider has access to tons of data to be their competitive advantage if somebody else with the same access to that data could be saving more lives, reducing costs, engaging patients better. So it is interesting to see this commoditization of the data exchange. And we're obviously very far from being able to just turn on a faucet and start receiving clinical data. But the closer we get, the more it's like, okay, well, then EHRs will have to differentiate on how usable they are, how much insight they provide, how healthy the patients become, and therefore how incentivized the providers are to care for them.
Not going to take us fully up the rails, but it sounds a bit like the AT protocol, which I think everybody should go take a look at. All right.
Can you give a brief one sentence explanation for the crowd what that is for those of us less familiar?
AT protocol developed at Twitter, now X, under Jack Dorsey, is a set of technologies that allow the transportation of right now social media across different clients, and you don't all have to have a centralized database. So any organization can launch their own PDS, which is data storage, and tie up to a protocol layer, and then any client can read from it. That wasn't one sentence. I wrote about lexicons, which is an AT protocol idea. And so anybody who wants to add a type of information or display a type of information has to publish a lexicon. So just to give you an example, if Blue Sky started only featuring text-based posts, if they wanted to introduce videos or different types of media, they would need to publish a lexicon explaining how am I going to store this data and represent it back to you. Other servers don't necessarily have to adopt that. They can still pull down the text-based posts and show them, but they wouldn't know how to interpret the video files, and so they would ignore them. With the challenge to the community is like, well, if you build an experience where a lot of people want to consume video, that is going to drive other servers to adopt that lexicon to start supporting video if they want to compete in that space. And so instead of the protocol saying, here is everything you must support, it is saying, here's how you read and write data. And otherwise, like anybody can publish a lexicon. If TikTok and Instagram want to have two different representations of video content, that's fine. They don't share it between each other. But if somebody wants to write a application layer that ingests both those lexicons, normalizes it, suddenly you can consume TikTok and Instagram content in a new interface. And so now the challenge is less around, I have proprietary data, to I have a better user interface, or I have a better algorithm. So it is the introduction of information blocking laws is opening us up to say it's no longer about siloing data. It is about a superior experience, whether that's for the clinician, the health system in general, or the patient.
Two thoughts. One is Instagram and TikTok in one feed sounds like my hell, in terms of just infinite time suck. Two, it's not unlike like the well-known smart configs and capability statements that FireServe's exposed that say, here are the things you can do. A little bit broader here in terms of data sets, payload types, operations, it sounds like, but not totally different. And you can imagine in a trust network having actual capability statements and well-known smart configs that are accurate, which is a big problem across Fire servers. I see some parallel threads.
The parallel thread that I'm seeing is, and I think some comedian said this in an Instagram reel that I probably regrettably watched a long time ago, but like back in the day, if you wanted more power, you would take control of more and more land, right? You would sort of colonize more and more land or resources. And nowadays, it's a little bit like these mega corporations have to sort of colonize your attention and your time. That's how they're monetizing everything. It's interesting to see patterns that are saying, well, let's make the valuable asset here the data exchange, whether it's because I post a tweet and Brendan likes to read it, or I call for a car and Brad wants to drive me somewhere to make money. If we start seeing more and more of these things become standardized and commoditized, the data, the actual request or the supply of this information, if everyone's allowed to have access to it, then everyone has to have a different way to make it valuable. Like Brad was saying, is it better for me? God, I would love an app that was like Instagram, but only shows me posts about plants and my family, because I started a freaking plant Instagram account and it's always showing me like people dying and Vanity Fair photos. I don't want to see those things. So, yeah, like if all this information lives somewhere else and so it's accessible and somebody else can make value from it, I guess that's better for the consumer. I'm surprised that these corporate entities are exchanging data voluntarily. Is that what's happening, Brad? Or are you saying they're being regulated to exchange the data?
I wouldn't say anybody on operating on the AT protocol is exactly capitalist in nature.
Okay.
That still has to get sorted out. But that there's a natural tension. We've always funded social media. Like the business model is advertising. But if you get to choose a client, everybody's going to gravitate towards a client that doesn't have advertising. I think there's a lot that has not been figured out in having this type of data sharing in healthcare and social media.
What we're saying both on the AT protocol and in everything that's going on in health tech is natural market states don't allow this to occur ubiquitously, right? Like this is an equilibrium we are by policy doing nationally in a very, this is not your granddaddy's Republicans in terms of the way we're intervening and equilibrializing the market. That's a made up word. But like the new equilibrium we're setting is very interventionist. And when you tack it on like federal privacy policy, federal AI policy, again, this is not the conservatives of the Reagan era. This is, this is a very interventional, very federal mandate type of policy that, again, suggests that overall policy partisanship is changing generationally.
Deregulation through regulation.
The deregulation is in the regulation, but it's something I'm supportive of, right? Holding on to data in a network or as a system of record doesn't achieve the outcomes that we need or want in health. And so to try something different, to rebuild this equilibrium in a different way that is fundamentally unique as a policy across any industry, except for automotive dealer management systems, then we get to see something new. We get to see if we can fix something in healthcare, build a better ecosystem of vibrant provider application choice, allow for value to accrue at the action level versus the data access level, right? Can I affect behavioral change on patients or providers to achieve better outcomes? That's very interesting, just from an academic standpoint.
We need quick thoughts because that's not everything that happened this week. Talk to us about, you got 30 seconds, Epic Community Registries. Hit us.
So the newest health grid, I will not call it with patient at the heart, the network effects products that Epic is using their market penetration among providers to go and sell to other entity types, these network products. They launched community registries, which is actually one of the most straightforward ones that they've released and named, that allows for registries to sort of architect and build their data needs, deploy it to partner health systems, and then have removed all this pain of clinical data abstraction. 5 registries are on there to start and still in build mode. It'll just be interesting to see how effective that is. Like any healthcare product, it threatens a whole suite of network effects and products that third parties that facilitate registry abstraction and things like that. We'll see if it hits the same ceiling and headwinds that Epic Payer Platform and other health grid products hit.
Talk to us about Ron Wyden. What happened this week?
My boy, Ron Wyden, he's very privacy focused, and he reached out to Epic in early December, maybe throughout the year, and they implemented controls in MyChart to allow for patients to have agency over their data sharing, right? Like to select whether OHSU can pull my data. And so now he's putting pressure on other EHR. He's a privacy hawk in terms of what he's done historically, so it could just be that. I think there's other motivations that you can check out the blog and read more about in terms of, does it actually play into reproductive health care and some of the data privacy things there? Does it it was Epic pushing him to push them. Like there's, tinfoil hat on for that one. There's a lot of like tea leaves to read and reading between the line. So I'll try and catch him next time he's in Portland and not in DC and see what we see when we're out there skiing on Mount Hood.
And then last thing, heading into the holidays, you get one surprise. What is it? What do you want it to be? I'll say I hate defining workflows based on HL7 feeds because I really struggle to read that documentation. Keep my fingers crossed for some Fire subscriptions surprise. How about you, Pryce?
Low hanging fruit here, but would love to see HTI 5. I think every time something like that comes out from the ASTP, it takes a long time for me to understand it, but I just eat it up.
That sounds like you're trying to avoid your in-laws this holiday.
Don't tell them that.
I'll take a information blocking enforcement action for 500. With that, thank you, everyone. That's the end of our Not a Podcast. We'll see you sometime after the holidays.